Hey, it's Cecil, and it's Sunday, and we are starting with a new series today. Also, hi, it's been a while since I've been on this channel. Sorry about that. But hopefully, this series will correct that. We are starting a series called The Skill Shop, and I basically have a list of skills that I either already know how to do or things that I would just like to kind of learn how to do to varying degrees. And a lot of them I would like to sort of share what I learn with all of you because I think, first of all, I think that learning together is fun, and second of all, sometimes it is just nice to be like, look, I did a thing, and share that with other people. Also, a lot of things will kind of vary in like, oh, this is just a useful little thing around the house, to, oh, this is useful in the political climate we live in. So, broad range of topics that we're going to be covering in the coming months. But today we are covering capturing wild yeast. And I have made a PowerPoint presentation about yeast because for the past almost 2 years now, I have thought yeast is honestly kind of cool. Fermentation, that's some neat shit right there. So that is what we are going to be doing today. Let's get into it. I am obviously live on Twitch as I record this, so you will see the chat, so you will know who I am talking to throughout this. All right, yeast. PowerPoint is a little bit bigger than the designated box, but that's okay. So, capturing wild yeast. As I mentioned on the main channel video, this is sort of like the putting into practice, actually doing stuff part of peer-reviewed revolution. So I do feel like these things are attached to each other. Capturing wild yeast. Let's do this. What is yeast? So yeast is a single-cell fungus. Some species, well, they respirate by fermentation, converting sugars into carbon dioxide and alcohols. Obviously, there are some yeasts that are pathogenic, but there's other yeasts that just hang out on like produce, and those are the sort of yeast that we use in baking and making alcohol and stuff like that. Yeast grows on foods with a low pH, so 5.0 or lower, and in the presence of sugars, organic acids, and other easy to metabolize carbon sources. Common foods that I have seen for harvesting wild yeast include dried fruits, fresh fruits, potatoes, and wheat flour. The potato and the wheat flour are two that I see a lot in people talking about making a sourdough starter wild yeast capture. So that's really cool. And we don't actually know how long yeast has been used for making bread, but the first written record of it comes from ancient Egypt. So she's been around for a while. Most historians agree that fermentation of any sort was probably done on accident in order for it to be done on purpose, which makes perfect sense. One of the earliest development of retail baker's yeast was back in 1868, and then during World War II was when granular dry yeast was produced for the first time, giving yeast a longer shelf life, no need for refrigeration, and a quicker rise. What do we use it for? We use it in bread and other baked goods. The carbon dioxide that is produced gives it that fluffy, airy texture of breadiness. We use it in alcohols. When the fermentation process goes on for longer and you feed it with sugar and whatnot, it has plenty of time to produce a more significant amount of alcohol. Because is alcohol produced in the fermentation process regardless? Yeah, but not enough to matter until it's been fermenting for a while. And then there's foods like Marmite, Vegemite, probiotics, yeast extract, obviously, and many other foods. And as for non-alcoholic drinks, root beer, kombucha, and kefir are a few. Kombucha is a fermented tea, and kefir is a fermented milk. Most kombucha, in my opinion, tastes like gym socks, but I like kefir. I can't obviously have it with actual milk, but it's the same process with a vegan milk. It's, well, maybe not an identical process, but it's a very similar process. So vegan kefir is out there, and that's what I've had. It has a sort of sour flavor, and then usually they add strawberry or blueberry flavor to it. And honestly, I like it. How we capture this guy. Today we are going to be using dried fruits, specifically raisins. It is important to make sure they're organic because fermentation is a controlled spoilage process and preservatives prevent spoilage. That's their whole shtick. That's what they're doing. So making sure there's not preservatives is important so that the yeast actually can grow. You can still do it if it's like got stuff on it. I've seen people recommend soaking the dried fruit like overnight in hot water to kind of break up some of the preservatives beforehand. So it's possible, but it's more convenient if there's just no preservatives. I got this 2-pound bag of organic raisins. I'm definitely not using all of this today. And then the recipe is 125 grams of filtered or spring or well water, city tap, too harsh. Obviously, the 50 grams of raisin, and then I'm using 2 grams of white sugar. We will be measuring all that out on food scale. I got a nice digital guy for Christmas, which is very exciting. And we will be popping it into a mason jar. Any jar that seals will work. So we're going to weigh out the ingredients, add it to the jar with the airtight lid. We're going to give it a shake. We're going to open the jar to let out some of that excess air, and then we're going to seal it back up, and we're going to set it in a warm spot that is out of direct sunlight. For me, I'm using, so my kitchen table is like pressed up against a wall because our kitchen is small and we don't have a real dining room. And then on the corner of the table, we have a sort of like corner, here, where is a good way? A like corner shelf thing. So I'm going to put the jar underneath that. And then there's a heat vent up on like near the ceiling. So there will be some heat, but not too direct, but in the vicinity. And it should be blocked by our seasonal plates to keep it out of direct sunlight. So basically, yeah, make sure it's relatively warm, not in direct sunlight. And then the process. Twice a day, so about every 12 hours, we're going to give it a check. We're going to open the lid to let out the carbon dioxide buildup. We're going to seal it. We're going to give it a shake for about 3 seconds. And then we're going to open the lid again to let out more carbon dioxide, and then we're gonna seal it again. This is vital, otherwise you end up with a yeast bomb. You can also leave it with a cheesecloth tied over the top if you need to be extra safe, and then only seal it during the times that you are giving it the old shakeroo. You know, within a few days, the water will start to get cloudy, bubbles will form around the raisins, and the raisins will begin to float. Once all of the raisins are buoyant, the fermentation will be complete. Depending on how warm your climate is will determine how long fermentation takes. Yeast prefers a bit of warmth. It needs to feel cozy in order to wake up properly. So this could be anywhere from 3 to 8 days. If you're somewhere where it is summer right now in the southern hemisphere or just in a warmer climate, it'll probably be closer to the 3 days. And if you're somewhere where it is colder, like me here in Detroit, it is winter and it is chilly as heck, although we are having a little bit of a warm up, but it'll probably be closer to the 6 to 8 day window, because something tells me, and I'm no expert, that warming up to almost 40 degrees is probably not good enough for the yeast. If you also have a really well insulated house and your heat is on and you have like good central heat or whatever, it might still not take that long. Once it is ready for use, we strain the water out of this jar into a jar without the raisins, and the raisins are still perfectly usable. You can use them to make some cookies or something if you would like. They are still fine. Use the yeast water right away or store in the fridge for up to 8 weeks. If you're storing it before you use it, make sure to give it about a tablespoon more of sugar and let it warm up out of the fridge to room temperature for about 8 hours so the yeast can wake up and get to work. This also, if you ever have like a partially open packet of yeast that you put in the fridge to preserve it now that it's open and exposed to the air, that is another thing. When you take it out of the fridge, you do have to let it warm up. Usually for dry yeast, it's just until it's room temperature, so it's not as big of a process, but the wild yeast is less tamed. She needs the time to wake up slowly, so you got to give her those 8 hours. So like if you're planning on making bread on Sunday, set it out Saturday night with the extra tablespoon of sugar and let her wake up. When making another batch, you can save some of the previous yeast water to help speed up the fermentation process the next time. So, using it in recipes. I took notes on this and then I turned these notes into this slide. First of all, wild yeast will not give the same effect as a uniform store-bought yeast. The flavor and the rise will be different probably every time because the exact species of yeast will vary. Obviously, as I continue making stuff out of this specific bag of raisins, it will probably be the same species of yeast because it's all in this one bag, right? But if I use a different batch of raisins, or if I use craisins or whatever, the yeast will likely be a little different. The flavor, the way that it behaves, it will also be different. Many people use their wild yeast to make a sourdough starter, and I know nothing about that, but I will find resources and I will share them when I also make the blog post portion of this, so that if you want to look more into sourdough stuff, you can do that. And as far as converting it into yeast, here's the beautiful table I made. The row that has the arrow pointing to it is what I see in the most recipes. So for about 1 packet of active dry or instant dry yeast, you will use about 20 grams of the fresh yeast water. I know that water is a 1-to-1 as far as milliliter to grams go. I don't know if the presence of the yeast will make it heavier. So I would measure the weight just to be safe. So that's generally the line that we are using. There is a proper website with a chart. That is another thing that I will link to when it comes time to the blog post part. That way, if you have more, it's a much bigger chart with a lot more rows. But this is a good general starting point. There are drawbacks to wild yeast, of course. There's pros and cons to everything. It will be inconsistent. So if you're looking to make the exact same bread every single time, that's probably not going to happen. It only has an 8-week shelf life, so you've got to use it or you're going to lose it. It takes longer to wake up and rise, from what I've read from other bakers. The first few times you make it, it might not be super effective. A lot of people have said that it took 2 or 3 times making yeast water to get a good, effective, active, useful yeast. So it is a lot of a slow patience process. And you have to take care of it so that you don't make a yeasty carbon dioxide bomb. Take care of her. But the benefits. If you run out of regular dry yeast, you have a little backup. Great for sourdough starters if that's something that you're into doing. The feeling of having done something, the little scientific experiment, it has turned into a useful household item. Great feeling. 10 out of 10. I recommend. Feel that connection to our human ancestors. Can you imagine the first time somebody accidentally left out their bread dough overnight, and when they remembered to come back and bake it, it came up fluffier than it usually does, and they're like, hey, why did that happen? So they started experimenting with maybe leaving it out for longer and figuring out what the heck is happening and finding out how long you can do that before mold happens, and what is the peak fluff. That's cool. And now we get to also experiment with that. The children yearn for the experimentation and the learning. It's me, I'm the children. We have no idea how inflation will progress in the coming years and what foods will be affected over time. Knowing how to make something that you can use and share with your neighbors is always a useful thing. I'm gonna try and put this in such a way that you can see the numbers. Yeah, we can see the numbers. How cool. Anyways, this is the water, which I've already measured out. So I already measured out 125 milliliters of water so that was just ready to go. But now, basically, I'm going to measure the raisins in the jar. I'm going to measure the sugar in the cap. And yeah, so first jar, zero her out. I imagine I will need to do more than this. Okay, we're looking for 50 grams. Digital scales are so useful. I didn't have a digital one until, well, literally this year. I don't know why my brain froze on that. And it's been a game changer because before it was such a pain using the manual one, and it was kind of hard to read because it wasn't clearly labeled which line was supposed to be like ounces or pounds or grams, and so I was always confused, and this is so much easier, and it's so easy to change the units. Anyways, 50 grams of raisins. And now, zero that out. And, like, I knew how to zero it out, but it wasn't a very precise thing, you know what I mean? Also, I forgot to bring a spoon up, so we're just gonna do this so carefully. Hell yeah! 2 grams! Turn this off now. We've got our measured stuffs. Gonna get this in our jar with our raisins. Luckily, because it's in the lid, whatever doesn't want to come off will. And then I'm going to pour in our water. I'm gonna lid her, not litter, don't litter. I'm gonna give it a little shake to make sure that the sugars are nice and dissolved in here, which it looks like they are. Not that it's very easy to see, but alrighty. Gonna open it, gonna close it, and then she's good to go. So over the next week, I will probably update you, not in the morning, but at the end of our streams, I will update you. We'll do the nightly yeast shake and talk about how it's going. And yeah, I look forward to it. You can see how, well, I don't know how well you can see it, but the yeast all want to go to the bottom here. So as fermentation happens, they will all start to like float up. Bubbles will start to form around them, all that good stuff. So that's it. It's all in all a very simple process, and I am excited to see it start to come to fruition. I love making little things. I love learning how to do new things, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Even if this isn't something that you want to do, maybe your curiosity just wants to see how it goes for me, and hey, we love that. To demonstrate the process that I had described earlier, we take the lid off, we put it back on, and then we go. Look at those bubbles. And then, important, we take the lid off, and then we put the lid back on. That wraps it up for right now. I will probably edit in whenever we take a look at this throughout the week into the video. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below if there are any skills that you would like to see at some point in the future. You can follow me in the links in the description box below, including on Twitch, where I'm doing the live streams of these, and on Substack or WordPress or Patreon, all of which will have the blog post version of the stuff going on in here if you would like that, as well as more resources to be able to click into. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one.